on this particular campaign has really exposed a chilling depth of collusion between corporate interests, specifically the fossil fuel industry, and the US system of justice, which has, in this case, in unprecedented ways, silenced and repressed and even incarcerated human rights lawyers, advocates, shareholders, the media, international organizations, in order to prevent them from seeking justice on behalf of indigenous communities and environmental justice. The case, it's really important to start at the beginning, and I'm going to try to do my best to cover this in 10 minutes. There are so many facets of this. If you go, I'm going to say it off the bat, if you go to chevrontoxico.com, you will see a lot of videos explaining the history of the case. So if there's things that I don't get to, go there, and you can email me at paz@amazonwatch.org. In the 1960s, the very first oil company to drill for oil in the Amazon was Texaco. They went to Ecuador. They deliberately dumped, over the course of decades, at least 16 billion, but probably more, over 100 billion gallons of toxic waste into the environment. They admitted to doing this. They admitted to doing it as a cost-saving measure. When they extracted the heavy foundation waters that need to be extracted before the crude, that is supposed to be stored in tanks and then re-injected into the earth. Texaco decided they could save $3 a barrel if they simply dumped that toxic waste into the environment. We're talking about what was, in this point, one of the most pristine parts of the Amazon rainforest, home to many indigenous communities who had been its stores for millennia. They deliberately polluted an area the size of Manhattan with toxic waste. In 1992, Texaco left, and they left behind that waste, and they refused to clean it up, even though they admitted to doing it intentionally. So indigenous communities, with support from lawyers, including Stephen Donziger, who you'll hear me talk about later, brought a lawsuit in New York against Texaco, which was their headquarters at the time. And this is where we go from the manipulation of the Ecuadorian government by a US corporation to allow this toxic contamination and poisoning, to the US government's complicity in denying justice for the indigenous people of Ecuador. Because after 8 years of fighting in New York, that case was thrown out, and they said that Texaco couldn't be sued in New York for the crimes that it had allegedly committed in Ecuador, and forced them to take their case back to Ecuador. That's the first step, where the US government deliberately denied people that a US corporation had admitted to poisoning intentionally access to justice. So the Ecuadorian people fought more. And at that point, Chevron acquired Texaco. It is the same company. They defended themselves. They'll argue, we never operated in Ecuador. It is the same corporation. Chevron is Texaco, and Chevron is liable. So the Ecuadorian communities began their lawsuit once again in Ecuador. And this is when Amazon Watch got involved. And we began going directly to Chevron's headquarters, to their shareholder meetings, following them in the press, telling the story about what they had happened, and they didn't like that very much. So they began retaliating against us. 8 years later, in 2011, on February 14th, the indigenous communities of Ecuador won, at that point, the most historic environmental case in history. This was an $18 billion judgment against Chevron for deliberately polluting. Half of that was punitive damages, and later on, when the Supreme Court of Ecuador upheld it in 2013, those damages were reduced because they were deemed unconstitutional. So $9.5 billion was the price tag that Chevron was supposed to pay. After fighting for 8 years again, after New York, in Ecuador, based almost exclusively on their own evidence submitted to the court. The evidence which still sits there today. Any of you can go to Ecuador, take a taxi tour, and you will see the contamination that Chevron deliberately left there. It still poisons the drinking water of 30,000 people to this day. So of course they lost the case. Chevron began retaliating back in the United States 2 weeks before that judgment came out. They went to federal courts here, they went across the country, and they started filing actions to get access to intimidate and threaten communities, organizations, and lawyers that had been fighting that case in Ecuador. They went after Amazon Watch, they went after Rainforest Action Network, and principally they went after Stephen Donziger. They found a lawyer based in New York who they thought could be the perfect scapegoat. And they concocted a weave of slap suits brought against activists who are challenging corporate power and fighting up, simply telling people the truth of what happened. Simply standing up like I'm doing now and talking about what happened in Ecuador, for example, can get you slapped. And Chevron is showing that judges will aid and abet them, that the Biden administration, whether a Democrat or Republican, will stand by while the fossil fuel industry tramples over the rights of advocates. And we cannot win a climate justice battle if we can't stand up in court and defend our rights and the rights of people who are harmed. So I encourage you all to get involved in that case. Follow us at AmazonWatch.org, ChevronToxica.com, and thank you so much for giving me the time to talk today.
Whew. Wow, thank you so much, Paul.
And when I got the invite to come out and talk about a government against the people, I couldn't pass up the opportunity. You know, it's crazy that we've got the kind of government that'll allow corporations to go after lawyers and activists. And we're like, how does it work that way? Unfortunately, the system's been set up that way, right? And there's been a long history of government intervention in social movements. We've heard about things like COINTELPRO, and, you know, a lot of us think that, you know, that's what happened back then, and things are different now, but things are actually a little bit worse. And I wanted to let y'all know just a little bit about some of the more recent history of what the FBI and other government organizations have been doing. So I guess I had my first run-in with the FBI back in the 90s. And I was like in middle school. I was living in Dallas, and my father was he was a corporate VP, and you know, we're watching football one Sunday and we get a call. He got a phone call, and he sat in the living room for a while and came back, and he's like, you know, that was one of our friends from church, and he called to let me know that the mayor is under surveillance by the FBI, and that I've been popping up in surveillance photos of, you know, the mayor at this golf course. And I'm like, how? What were you guys doing? He's like, we weren't doing nothing. We were just playing golf, right? But, you know, this is the level that our government goes through to really target those that we see as trying to do good, those that we see trying to make change. The government is relentless in repressing activists. So that was back in the 90s, and, you know, luckily Ron Kirk had a great term in Dallas. He went on to do some pretty cool things. But a little later on, I don't know if y'all remember, man, it's been a while. Back in 2010, there was the earthquake in Haiti down in, you know, the epicenter was Port-au-Prince. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and my church started doing relief work. So, you know, it really wasn't much, but our pastor had a meeting, and we realized that Haiti is closer to Atlanta than California is. So we decided to put our resources together, see what we could do for folks. So we happened to be right there in Atlanta with CNN, ended up getting in touch with Sanjay Gupta, right? And we're, you know.
7 people died in Kentucky from flooding. You know, 80 people or so died last year in Oregon from heat waves. Like, we don't have the option to just let the fossil fuel industry steamroll us so their pockets can get fatter. You know, we need to band together on this. And, you know, we're also worried. We appealed this decision and we lost. But as part of that process, the judge basically said, you know, it was an irrelevant mistake that Jess was labeled a terrorist, and so that's really worrying too, that people can just be labeled terrorists with no accountability whatsoever. And yeah, we're just, you know, seeing the state in the fossil fuel, oh shit. All right, it's still working, that's good. You good? So yeah, I would encourage you all to get involved in our campaign. As I said, we recently lost the appeal. And so we're going to be launching a clemency campaign coming up. And for that, we're going to need everyone's help. That's a totally different ballgame than an appeals process. So the website is supportjessicaresnicek.com. It's on the back of my shirt if you see me walking around. Her last name is Reznicek. It's kind of a hard one. We're on social media at FreeJessRez. That's R-E-Z on Instagram and Twitter. But yeah, we're being blocked. So that sucks. But on our website, there's a lot of info. If you want to dive into the legal stuff, there's a ton of stuff there about that. And then also you can buy these awesome shirts that Kat Eng made, designed for us. There's the eagle and the snake myth, which is just kind of some beautiful symbolism. You can write to Jess. She loves receiving letters from folks, and sign the petition. We're going to be launching this new phase, and yeah, we just really need the support of everyone.
Thank you so much. All right, so that concludes all our speakers. Thank you so much, Charlotte, Jason.
Against the state. And that was when the attorney-client privilege came into existence, because we believed, you know what, even if these poor people have nothing, even if we are convinced that this person is threatening the interests of the powerful, and we're going to crush them, let's give them at least a tiny little bone, one person, their attorney, who they can trust when they're going up against the state. So for hundreds of years, this privilege, this right, the attorney-client privilege, has been the most ironclad right in our criminal justice system. You've probably all heard of it, right? Everyone's heard of the attorney-client privilege. And the reason this is important, and the reason this affects all of us, not just Steven Donziger, is because the reason Steven Donziger was sitting in a jail is because he defended that right. He said, you cannot take my phone, you cannot take my communications, because my clients, these children in Ecuador who cannot breathe the air, who cannot drink the water, they are depending on me. They trust me. They have shared every intimate detail of their lives with me as their attorney. And I don't have the right to pass on this information to Chevron, who will use it against those kids. Again, this is the most ancient right that we all hold. If you believe in democracy, if you believe in civil liberties, if you believe in anything good on this earth, you should believe that everyone on this earth should have someone in their camp, at least one person, their attorney. This is the right that Steven Donziger defended, and for defending that right, he was criminally charged, convicted, and thrown in a jail. That should not be acceptable to any of us. Even if you don't care about the environment, even if you don't know a damn thing about what happened in Ecuador, the fact that our most basic constitutional and civil liberties are being destroyed by corporations like Chevron has to be something that all of us care about here in the United States. Okay, so let me give you one other example of how what's unfolding in this courtroom in Steven Donziger's case, and in my case with Paul, is going to affect all of us. And that is a case involving two defendants in southern Utah who went into a factory farm, documented horrendous conditions, published those photographs in the New York Times. And the reason we went in, I'm going to be brief about this, there's a lot of horrible things unfolding in factory farms: environmental pollution, human trafficking. The same factory farm, the largest pig farm in the nation, prior to our investigation, had been implicated in human slavery. Do we all know that there are actual slaves in factory farms in the United States of America? In the year 2022, there are still slaves, people shipped in from other countries, involuntarily held in these factory farms to make our bacon and our bologna and our meat. Right, so this is already a corporation that has been implicated in so many crimes, who's literally been found to have physically assaulted their own employees for merely asking for a higher wage, something more than $7 an hour, because these families in North Carolina simply couldn't survive on the paltry wages they have been given, and they were assaulted by this corporation, physically assaulted. This is not me concluding this. This is a court of appeals in the federal government. So this corporation has done all these awful things for many decades. And the specific thing we went in to find more about was the use of a device called the gestation crate. So gestation crate is a 2-foot by 7-foot metal tomb. It almost looks like a gauntlet, like a claw, that wraps itself around the body of a 600-pound mother pig and traps her there for her entire adult life, sometimes 5-6 years, where every single day of your life, every single moment of your dreadful existence, all you can see in front of you is the metal bars a few inches from your face. But perhaps the most awful thing about the system is crating is one of the few joys these poor animals have is when they're forcibly impregnated every 5 or 6 months and they give birth to their babies. Every mother animal loves their children. They love them as much as life itself. And I want you to imagine for a moment, just think of somebody you love. It could be a dog or cat, maybe it's a child, a niece or nephew. I have 2 nieces I love more than anyone on this earth. They bring so much beauty and joy and vibrance to life. And I want you to imagine these mother pigs giving birth to these babies, looking at one of their babies and saying, I love you, in a very ancient, genetic, primitive way that's embedded in the brain and the DNA of every living creature on this earth. And then have that baby taken from you while you're trapped in a crate, have her trapped in a metal grate just a few feet away from your face, and watch her slowly starve to death. Because in a factory farm of 1.2 million pigs, when there's a little runt that's a little too weak to get to the nipple and nurse, when there's a little runt who maybe breaks her leg or injures her foot and can't walk over to her mom to nurse, most of us on this planet, if we have mothers, those mothers will come and help us. But a mother pig is trapped in a tube in the world as that baby starves to death day after day, screams in agony and begs for her mother to help her, and she can do nothing about it. Folks, this shit is fucking evil. This shit is so evil, you don't even see it in horror movies. Right? You don't see horror movies where a mother is trapped in a cage and forced to watch one of her babies slowly starve to death just a few feet from her face. Yet this is unfolding on this scale of millions at factory farms owned by this company, Smithfield Foods, because they will not do
their body cameras, and they got the seemingly inherent right to just confiscate and take any surveillance immediately. So that whole shit was swept under the rug, and there's no consolation or recourse for the family of Jonathan Cortez. I need somebody to say when I say justice for y'all, I need to hear somebody say Jonathan Cortez. I said justice for? Jonathan Cortez! Justice for? Jonathan Cortez! And I appreciate your time. I'm gonna give it to my brother. He gonna learn you something about this month here.
Peace. Peace. How y'all feeling? Make some noise. Make some noise. How y'all feeling? Come on. Power to the people. I just want to mention a few things. Basically, since this is going down in August, I want to acknowledge and, bring to y'all awareness that we're in Black August month. And Black August is rooted in the resistance we're all talking about right now. We prioritize that struggle, what's going on in what is now known as the United States. It's the Black folks struggle, the new African folks struggle. That's what folks need to prioritize to understand if we're gonna get anywhere, motherfuckers need to join in solidarity and in partnership. So we're talking about Black August, we're talking about political prisoners. Rochelle McGee is still alive. He's over 80 years old and he's still alive, fighting for everybody's rights here, standing up, radical direct action to what we're talking about. So it's important that we remember George Jackson, we remember Jonathan Jackson, W.L. Nolan, we remember William Christmas, we remember James McClain, and these are folks that have passed away, right? They've got murdered. This is very important to make our connection, and people will celebrate it and commemorate and honor. Don't celebrate it, we commemorate and honor folks, right? You tell people, you teach people about what's going on. They encourage you to possibly write a political prisoner, write folks, you don't have to know them to really connect with people, right? They encourage you to fast, right? For your health, for yourself. They encourage you to train, to understand what we're facing up against. It's very important that we acknowledge Black August. Another point I want to make too, since this is an anti-FBI event, right? And we're talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I'd like to encourage people to read this book called Bad Mexicans. And it's by Kelly Little Hernandez. And it's about the Magonistas. There's a journalist who was an anarchist, Ricardo Magon. And he was a journalist, right? I understand. You see what's going on in Palestine and Mexico now. Journalists are getting murdered and assassinated because they are putting the message on the front line. They are relaying the people's message, the people's word. This is in 1908.